are happy to have everyone here, and we have a great speaker tonight that's going to be speaking on fundraising for companies. And I'm going to introduce Cory in just a second, but just a little bit about tonight's session. Of course, it's about the presentations. And the presentations, hopefully you've all been working on that. What we are going to do is go back and forth between having a presentation in here, and then we'll go online and get a presentation from there. So we'll just keep that going back and forth as far as the possibilities. I think some of you are under the impression that you only have 5 minutes. You actually have 7 to 10 minutes. We can do that just fine. And so I don't want anyone to have the pressure on them that that they have to hurry through it. I'd rather have you take your time and do exactly that and get a good good presentation from your perspective. So take your time. Don't feel pressured on the hurry. The other thing that I'd like to do is, I've done this a number of times when I was back in university, is get feedback from people. So I want you to, if you would, to take time, and if you got some paper, we've got some going around that you can use the back of it, and just tell what you liked about somebody's presentation and what kind of encouragement you would do. And this is all about a learning experience. This isn't about critiquing anyone, and it's about that camaraderie that we were looking at. And between all of us, we should be able to give some pretty good feedback to people as far as their presentation, talking about their business, what kind of capital that they're trying to raise, if that's part of your presentation, what role they play in it. So that feedback is something that will be very important. So try to do that. And this is not, I won't be going around the room and asking everyone to give feedback. This is something that you can offer if you have an observation for someone, to give them that feedback. But again, like I've done in the past where I go around the room and get everyone included, we're not going to do that. And it's fine if everyone does have some feedback for an individual, but it's not something that is going to be put the pressure on you to give feedback. So I'm looking forward to this. I want to hear more about your businesses and just what is going on. Now, another thing is, I think Mark is on. Mark, are you on someplace up there? Oh, there you are. Yeah, Mark had thrown out the possibility of doing a week 7. And so that is going to happen. And as we go through the evening, I'll have Mark talk just a little bit more about that. I think I'm going to be traveling next week, so I don't think I'm going to be here. I'd signed up for the 6th. And so Mark is going to come down from Pueblo and lead the effort, which we appreciate. And again, he can talk about that. That's next week. We really want to have this. I think this is the first one we've done of these kind of things here at Emergent Campus for sure. And I think it's something that we want to repeat. So this is a learning experience for us. And so whatever feedback you can give us next week would be great. I think Mark is going to be passing out, or at least have some way to do evaluations so you can give feedback both on myself, on the topics we covered, just the whole experience. As this was valuable for you, what improvement would you offer us to do this? So if we decide to go ahead and offer this again, that we can do some continuous improvement ourselves and make this a better offering. So any questions about what I've said so far? Thoughts? I don't want anything to be vague. And again, if you just joined us on the screen, I can't see you and look at the camera at the same time. We're going to go back and forth. I'm going to start with somebody volunteer in this room, and then we'll go online and we'll go back and forth between the two. So our speaker tonight is named Cory Finney, and I would assume Cory is up behind us at this point. Cory is the fund manager for the Greater Colorado Venture Fund. And he supports companies in the communities throughout Colorado. And just he wrote on his LinkedIn profile, I think this is really good, that sums him up really good. So he says, I have a passion for entrepreneurship and the outdoors. I'm a 6th-generation Coloradoan and come from a family of entrepreneurs. I thrive when I'm supporting founders or building communities. So that's Cory's own words on what he's up to in life. And Cory and Mark and I chatted briefly this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to his presentation. He went through that. Again, he's talking about raising capital as a entrepreneur, and he certainly has a background both with his own interest in doing that in the past and leading the venture fund that he has. So Cory, if you're on, and I think Sage has given everyone permission, for those who are online, to share their documents. So you should all be able to hit the share button and bring that up and make that work. So hi there, Cory. Thanks for joining us tonight. And you were on.
Okay, great. I will see if I can pull up my slides real quick. All right. Thanks for having me, everyone. I appreciate it. Sorry, not there in person, but appreciate you bearing through the screen with me. I thought, yeah, really appreciate the introduction. A little bit more kind of about who we are. We are the Greater Colorado Venture Fund. I'm one of 3 partners. We manage a venture capital fund. It's $17.5 million. We currently have about 20 companies in the portfolio. And we're typically investing into seed stage companies across rural Colorado. So we're supported largely by the state of Colorado as one of our largest investors. And then we have a handful of other investors that support us from across the state as well. A little bit about my background. I graduated from CU Boulder, started a company in the ski industry and ran that for 3 years. And then after that, I joined an accelerator program called Boomtown in Boulder. And I was entrepreneur in residence there. My job was to teach finance and fundraising to companies that went through our program. And through that, I learned a lot of what doesn't work around startup financing, and a little bit of what does work. And that led me to start my first fund called Kokopelli Capital. That fund has 35 investments in it right now. We're done deploying out of that fund. And through that work and my passion for rural Colorado, just wanted to figure out a way to get back and support the communities I love. And so that's the path that led me to the Greater Colorado Venture Fund. So between my experience at Kokopelli, Boomtown, GCVF, and then just personal investments, I've advised probably 150 companies on fundraising strategies and directly invested in about 90 companies. And I would say about 90% of those are in Colorado. I'm going to skip through. This is a presentation that we've gone through a couple times. And so I'm going to skip through a handful of these slides. But tonight, really want to chat on venture capital, but I think it's important context to understand venture capital within the larger capital stack. It's just one tool of many in an entrepreneur's tool belt as they go out and think about raising capital. Rule number 1 of finance is risk return. So the lower the risk, the lower the expected return. The higher the risk, the higher the expected return. And this is really important to keep in mind as you're thinking about what kind of capital to bring into your business. You know, we like to say, as you can see, there's non-dilutive financing. That might be grants, business plan competitions. Those can be great sources of money. Some of those come with more risk than others, right? So if you win a business plan competition, that's generally free money as opposed to a second mortgage. There's certainly some risk tied up in that. Traditional debt is going to be looking for, you know, returns of anywhere, depending on the loaner or the loaner and how much you're borrowing and your own kind of profile, anywhere from 4% interest to 20% interest. Venture capital, we're typically buying equity stakes in companies or convertible debt, something that will become an equity stake. And venture capitalists are looking for, you often hear 10x. We'll talk about 10x a couple times in this presentation. That means if I give you $1, my expectation is that I want to receive $10 back for every dollar that I give you. So if you think about that just in terms of overall cost of capital, equity capital is going to be probably the most expensive form of capital that you can find. And therefore, I think it should be treated really carefully. We like to say, there's a saying in our industry that venture capitalists are rocket fuel dealers. Like, our job is to sell rocket fuel, and you only want to put rocket fuel in a rocket. If you're not driving a rocket, there's no need for rocket fuel. And I think that's really important because a lot of folks, I think, immediately jump to equity as the solution to fund their company. And the reality is equity is typically the profile for equity is pretty narrow, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. Angel investors, they play alongside venture capitalists, but they have a lot more flexibility in why they're investing. So an angel investor may invest because they like you. They may invest because they're a family member. They may invest because they know something about the space and think that they can help you. Or, it may be a philanthropic thing where they want to support a local business in their community. So angel investors have a lot more kind of range on the spectrum, but they still are playing in that venture capital, and they're generally expecting multiples back on their money. So again, debt may want 20% back. So if they give you $1, they expect $1.20. Equity is going to want some type of multiple, whether that's twice their money to 10 times or even more their money back. And I'm going to throw a lot out there right now. I typically enjoy doing this a little bit more Q&A, but want to get through the presentation part, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions. So feel free to just jot down notes as I rip through some of this. I'll send this deck out. There's a lot of words on this slide, so we don't need to go through it all, but kind of high level, the structures we use, and we all think, in our minds, these are all equity structures looking for the same kind of return profile. But traditional equity, I give you $10, you give me 10% of your company. Convertible debt is essentially, I give you $10 and we agree upon a valuation cap. So I'll get, like, we know it's going to be at least no higher than a $3 million cap. But the idea is that one day that will become equity in the company. Safe, similar to convertible debt. The difference between a safe and a convertible debt, which is worth knowing, is that convertible debt is debt. So if something happens to the company, it's a liability and it gets paid out first. A safe is treated more like equity. There may be special provisions around it, but typically safes are more like equity. So if something happens, they sit in the same layer of the capital stack as the founders. And then revenue-based investments, we very similar to convertible debt, but the idea is as we receive a percentage of revenue, our right to equity decreases. So it's a way for founders who are valuation sensitive to retain ownership while still receiving the high risk capital. And again, typically most of these companies are coming to us because they need rocket fuel, and by and large, they're not bankable, right? Whether it's too early in revenues or it's a software company, there's nothing to collateralize. This is an ever evolving kind of landscape. We see more and more that a bunch of companies. So what happened is it used to take $5 million to start a business. So you'd go out, you'd raise $5 million, you'd stand up your servers, have a bunch of infrastructure. The cloud world has basically dropped the cost of starting a business. On 50 grand, you can do what it used to take $2 million to do. And so this has opened up more rounds of financing that we see happening for companies before they're reaching Series A rounds. So a company may have a pre-seed round, a seed round, a seed plus round, a seed plus plus round, and then raise a Series A. The names kind of don't really matter. But we're also seeing more and more early stage investors come into the ecosystem. When we started Kokopelli in 2017, there were 13 venture funds in Colorado. Today, there's over 75 that we've identified on a list. And we have a lot more funds from the coast looking to Colorado, trying to basically find companies. It's not, the reality is that valuations are often lower in Colorado than they are on the coastal region. And sometimes we see valuations for rural companies are often even lower than what you may see in Boulder, Denver. That's not necessarily an indication of quality of company. It's often an indication of what the venture capital fund ends up thinking that the return outcome could be for a company. So if they feel that the ceiling might be a little bit lower, then they'll orient on that early on in the valuation by dropping it down to what it may have from a coastal company. I'll spend a little bit of time on this slide, and I touched on it before, but want to just kind of highlight the difference between angel investors and venture capitalists. Angel investors, again, they can invest for a myriad of reasons. It may be, like I mentioned, philanthropy. It could be impact. It could be for profit. They may be industry experts and you're a food company, they've sold a food company and they want to kind of pay it forward, invest, and, you know, bring their knowledge and skill set to your business. So angel investors we see play across a wider spectrum. Venture capital ends up going into about 1% of companies that get funded. So it's a very, very, very small window. And the reasons for that really come down to math, which I'll unpack, I think, on the next slide here. But venture capitalists are managing other people's money, and we have a legal responsibility to maximize the value that we can get for our investors, right? So it's important to remember, like, we're not investing our own cash. We have a little bit of our own cash in the fund, but by and large, we're investing other people's money. And so we're optimizing for the return on our fund. And in our business, to be in the top quartile, which everybody wants to be in the top quartile because that allows us to raise another fund and continue forward, we have to return 3x on capital. So if we have $10 million under management, we need to turn that into 30 million to put us in the top portion. And that's important because you'll often hear from a venture capitalist is the market's not big enough or the opportunity is not big enough. And what that kind of comes down to is VCs by and large are playing a power law game where we have a portfolio, and maybe I'll bounce back to this side. So we have a portfolio, and statistically about a third of companies go to zero, a third return 1x, and a third make up our proceeds. And so that's where you hear the 10x heuristic, is because we need the high performing companies in the fund to cover the companies that don't perform as well or don't have as strong of financial outcomes. So I'm sure there'll be some questions here. I'm happy to come back to it. But that through that lens, that's again why we say venture capitalists really are selling rocket fuel, because you need to have that breakout type growth potential where we can recognize a 10x return on our investment, and you know, ideally beyond that potentially. A side story, there's a fund in Colorado that invested $50,000 into Uber's first round. And when Uber went public, that $50,000 was worth 42.5 million, I believe. So that's a pretty crazy outcome, I think, and not anything that we expect when we're going into it. But those are the stories that get written about. Back to difference between angel investors and venture capitalists. Angel investors, they can act quick. They may meet you in 30 minutes, love you, and commit to writing a check there on the spot. Venture capitalists, we typically have a structure and a process that we run companies through. And it's a fair question to say, what's your process? And the VC should be able to explain, hey, okay, we have this round of diligence, this round. Overall, it takes us 30 to 60 days to make an investment decision. So venture capitalists move a little bit slower, often have larger checks, and typically reserve funds for follow-on investments. So we generally expect our companies to raise multiple rounds of financing throughout their life, and we want to be able to participate in those rounds, assuming that things are going well for each company. Angel engagement, as far as hands-on, they may be an advisor and they may be working with you every day on your business. Venture capitalists may be working with you every day. With our companies, you know, we have Slack channels set up with every company. I talk to companies anywhere between once a day to once a quarter, just depending on where they're at in the business, how much support they're needing at that time. So we're typically pretty hands-on. What you'll see is angel investors generally don't take board seats. If you are raising money from a venture fund, you should expect to have a board seat associated with that. This is kind of everything I just talked to summed up in words. I think who it's not good for, if you aren't willing to take on partners as a founder, and that's just something that you don't want to entertain, then a venture capitalist is not going to be the right partner for you, because VCs typically want to be a little bit more engaged. Angel capital might be a better solution. If you're bankable, I'd really encourage you to explore bank financing. Again, it's cheaper. It comes with a lot less expectations and restrictions than venture capital, generally. I'm generalizing here. Bootstrapable. I love businesses that are bootstrapped. I think that, profitability is is a great way to go. And then Main Street businesses. So when we're thinking about companies and the type of companies we invest in, we like to say that they're headquartered in rural but can serve customers anywhere. So for example, we have a company in Telluride called Western Rise, and they make performance apparel. And they're selling performance pants on 6 different continents around the world out of Telluride, Colorado. We have another company in Eagle, and they are making e-bikes and distributing those across the nation, now into Canada as well. So that's kind of our thought process is being able to open up those larger markets is what enables the scale that we're going after. This isn't super important. It just kind of shows a little bit more, like we have a portfolio. So we're looking across our performance at all the different companies in the portfolio to help us figure out where we want to allocate capital. We invest, what is relevant is each venture fund has a 5-year investment period and then a 5-year management period. So we have to invest our entire fund over 5 years. And then the idea is that we harvest the companies and sell the companies over the back end of that fund. And so if you find a fund that's really early on, the way they invest and are thinking about investments is going to be different than a fund that's in year 4 or 5 of its deployment. So as we move into our cycle, we might end up investing a little bit later in companies, knowing that we still need to get them to exit, but we don't have the same window to do so as we would have if we would have been investing in year 1 or year 2. So that's another question that if you're talking with the VC is fair to ask, is where they're at in their fund life cycle. This is the kind of the math I was talking about, where a handful of companies end up on the left side of this chart. The returns come from the right side, which again is where the power law stuff comes from. I think setting dilution expectations is really important. We tell companies that they should expect, if they're raising a round of financing, to sell between 15 and 30% at that point in time. So that doesn't mean each round stacks, right? Ideally, your valuation is going to increase as you raise capital. And so you may sell 15%, but then the pie grows, and then you sell another 15% of a bigger pie, and then that pie grows, and you sell 15% of that pie. So the calculus you want to do as an entrepreneur is, if I give up 15% of my company, will it allow my business to get to a point where it's worth exponentially more? And even though I don't have that 15%, my portion is still larger. And if you start to hit a point where you're saying no, then that's a good time to think about pushing towards profitability and sustained growth, or even potential acquisitions for the business. Okay, this is more about kind of how organizations can get together to support their ecosystems. I think the region you all are in with SoCo Angels is doing an amazing job. So with that, threw a lot out there. I'm sure there's plenty I missed and plenty more to cover, but want to open it up for questions because I think that's just more helpful, hopefully.